Don't be feeling blue, no, no. Shine your light all around, like I know you can do, baby. Yeah, I know you can do. Now some people call me. Welcome, my friends, to the Sage of Quay Radio Hour, your home for free and critical thinking, and I'm your host, Mike Williams. Today, Christopher Gardner returns to the show. The conversation with Christopher is wide-ranging as we discuss the mud flood topic and offer our perspectives on other aspects of the truth community. And so, without further ado, here's Christopher. Well, folks, my very good friend Christopher Gardner is back, and every time Christopher's on the show, we have some very, very fascinating discussions. And we've talked about a couple of topics on and off. I know you're doing some work down in Costa Rica with the homes that you're building. Maybe we could talk about that a little. You sent me some pictures. They're fascinating. And you can tell us what it is exactly that you're doing down there. But again, so thank you, Christopher, for coming back on the show, and it's good to see you again.
My pleasure, Mike. It's great to see you too. Well, I would like to dive into talking about construction because that's something that, in these types of channels you don't really hear much about. But it's construction and dignity. They're one in one. And I'll kind of link it together. So when I was a kid in my grandmother's house, there was a picture from the turn of the 20th century. So early 1900s of my family on a road in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And when I was a little kid, I would look at that picture and I was absolutely enamored because everybody in the picture was beautiful. And then they weren't just beautiful because they were my family. They were everybody had a chiseled jaw, their eyes were bright. They were wearing the most dapper clothing you could imagine. And my grandmother ended up telling me that most of it was hand stitched, but all the men were wearing suits with vests. All the women were wearing dresses, and I don't even know all the names of women's clothing. And they just were so dignified. They were just dignified. And in the picture, you could see the background as clear as you could see the foreground. So the people that were walking in the back, they also looked beautiful.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just my family. And all the signs you could tell in the street were hand painted. I would just sit there for hours and look at this picture because it was just wait a minute, this is the 80s when I was seeing this picture, and people just did not look like that. People in the 80s didn't look like that anymore. And I got really confused when I was growing up because we were fed the evolutionary model of things. We were fed this notion that we came from apes and we came from very undignified background. But yet, I always had this tearing memory within me that no, my family 100 years ago were dignified. You can't tell me I came from an undignified background. They were beautiful and intelligent and successful enough to reproduce, right?
Right.
And so when I started learning in physics about entropy and negentropy in a system, you can't go from a chaos state to a non-chaos state. What occurs in systems is you start with the highest order and then it degrades over time. And the way you look at the way we're born with, quadrillions of stem cells. We grow and adapt to our environment. And as we get older, we move through a threshold and then we degrade, right? We don't start off in a chaos. We actually start off perfect and then we descend into chaos. So I always had these kinds of things in my mind, and it kind of when I really started to question the grand narrative that we were fed, that we were, essentially just smart apes, it just didn't make sense to me. So now this brings me into construction. Another thing was when I was fascinated with pyramids. I think in some of our other discussions we've talked about pyramids. And I guess it was 10 or 12 years ago, I came across the work of Dr. Davidovitz in France at the Geopolymer Institute. And in the 70s, he had figured out exactly how the pyramids were built. And it wasn't, priests levitating limestone across the desert or anything like that. He was able to show that all the stones in the pyramids were essentially a geopolymer. And a geopolymer, to define that, is a man-made stone. So unlike cement, which is like an alkaline process where you use like some sort of like binder to bind aggregate together in a calcifying way, they figured out how to bind things using acids. And these are, when they bind, they turn into stone. And so there was the requisite materials in that area of the world where they could bind material together and make what we know as limestone. And he came up with he was able to repeat it, which is something I really appreciate. I hate, people that call themselves scientists and don't do experiments. He actually did the experimentation, and now he consults for billion-dollar military institutions, and he puts in like all of their, runways and things like that. So he obviously knows what he's talking about. But what got me was between the Roman aqueducts, the pyramids that were built, all these temples that I saw in India, it would grate at me to know that we cannot do now what we had been able to do in the past. So how are you going to tell me that we're the most evolved now? Like we're the pinnacle, because that's the grand narrative, is that we're evolving and that people in technology is the highest it's ever been now. And then so none of this made sense. If like we're the highest now, we should be able to repeat what we used to be able to do. Well, there's no contracting company in the world that can go build a pyramid right now. Not a one. They couldn't do it.
Right.
I would put it out there that there's no contracting company in the world that could build any building that could last over 200 years. So how is it that our ancestry that was supposedly less evolved than us be able to do all this stuff? And so just a few months ago, I came across a bunch of different notions when it came to this thing called the mud flood. And that started to make a lot of sense to me, because what they were essentially showing is that, speaking of pyramids and mud flood, the biggest pyramid in the world is this pyramid called Göbekli Tepe. I think it's in eastern Turkey. And the reason why nobody knew it was there forever was it was covered in dirt. And covered in dirt. And when you listen to what people talk about, why it was covered in dirt, it's absurd. The reason why Göbekli Tepe was so impressive to me, and the reason why the current narrative makes no sense, is I build domes for a living. I have a company called Tico Dome where that's what we do. We build domes. And what's amazing is when you put a surface on especially like a dome, just to cover it would take more material than what it would actually take to build it. So a lot of times I hear about my clients, because they'll be talking about the cost of things, and the cost of things comes down to the amount of material. And I'll be like, yeah, it's 40 meters of material to build the dome, but then it's another 40 meters to cover it. And they're like, what? People don't understand how much material it takes to actually cover other things. So in that, when I heard the story of these beautiful pyramids that are covered by earth, that just makes no sense to me. And so that's why the mud flood thing really started to resound in me, because there had to be some sort of event that caused these things to be covered. And I'd also seen a bunch of different documentaries of all these different cities where essentially cities are built on top of old cities, not like ruins of Indians. Like they were built on top of great structures. So all this put together under the guise of knowing that I can't prove it, obviously, but like, I really feel that we come from a dignified past. And for whatever reason, it fits the policymakers' modus operandi to like disempower us by telling us that we come from apes. Like, when you know what we used to be able to build relative to what we can do now, it just makes more sense to me that people were much smarter, healthier, and much more intelligent than what we're led to believe.
Yeah, it's interesting because the mud flood introduces a whole different perspective, right? It says that the fall of civilization, or the alleged fall of civilization, was not a long, long time ago. It says that maybe 150 to 200 years ago, there was something in place civilization-wise, Christopher, that was, like you said, very sophisticated, advanced, and so on. But we're given stories about the 1800s and the 1700s and so forth that do not reflect any of the evidence that has been presented with regard to the mud flood theory.
Absolutely. And I also, like, as a little kid, when I would go see these relics or these old buildings, you know, all around the United States, I literally would say to myself, were these built by giants? Because, like, all the doorways would be massive. Everything was like a larger scale. And when you start to build, you know about scale, and you just know the cost of things. So, like, seeing these photos and seeing all these things when it comes to, as a dome builder, domes are very unique. Even though they're very simple, like, it's the reason why nature uses them so much. It takes a very high level of execution to get them right. And to find out, like, all these buildings all over the world all had these dome tops. And these dome tops had, like, these types of covering that were metallic a lot of times. So they'd be masonry and metallic. And when you come to learn about how supercapacitors work and how batteries work, well, that's exactly what you have. You have a ceramic next to a conductor. And the most efficient ones are, you know, hemispherical. So if you have any knowledge of how, you know, wireless electricity was around back at the turn of the 20th century, and how I just had the gut instinct too, when the first time I was building domes, I was like, if I run conductors over every line of strata that we actually lay down and compact, I can make this a big earth battery. And so now I feel this sense of vindication in myself, because, like, you know, listening to Flat Earth British, and then John Levy and the Conspiracies Are Us channel, like, they go into this whole notion that these buildings were actually transducing the electrostatics of the area into usable heat, if not other things like resistive heating. And also, just so people know, I'm a professional oven builder. Like, I build fireplaces and ovens, and I'm very well versed in how thermodynamics should work with fire, because that's the only medium I've ever known is fire, right? But I remember learning about fireplaces and all these different fireplaces, and none of these old fireplaces in these great buildings were ducted for smoke. Like, that is the dead giveaway.
Yeah.
How could you have the what is it called, the Versailles, like that massive building in France for the royal family of France, and all the fireplaces there, none of them are ducted. They had no chimneys. Like, what's going on? Like, that in and of itself, like, people should be like, wait a minute, what's happening? And the chimneys that are there were added after 1860 or something. Like, what was originally there, like, they were using resistive heating. And so people know what resistive heating is. It's when you bring two poles of electricity close to each other, it creates a short, and in that short you have resistance, and in resistance you have heat. And it's a very simple way to gain heat from electricity.
That, and also when you get into it, the plumbing.
Right.
They want you to believe that these very elaborate, beautiful buildings were built, yet, you know, essentially you had to use, what, an outhouse, I guess?
Yeah, it makes absolutely no sense. You have, like, gold leaf on the walls, but yet they're using outhouses? Nuh-uh. That's not, that story is total BS. that's the exciting thing about this. This is why, to me, this is an empowering narrative. The main narratives that are out there are to like totally chop people's legs out from under them. But this is a narrative that's like saying, no, 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 no. It actually mimics what nature is. In nature, things start off great and then they disintegrate physically. And what the mud flood is trying to reveal in the architecture that was pre-mud flood and then the things that still exist to today, it really shows that what was being built pre-mud flood comes from a higher order of thought. It was a higher order of thought. And then whatever the catastrophe was that created that, it essentially, from what I could tell, annihilated the educated class. And then the only people that were left over were essentially like lots of young kids. And you can tell a kid anything and they'll believe it. Years ago, I saw the movie The Village. Have you ever seen that?
No.
The Village is an incredible story. I always tell people to watch the movie because in that movie, it depicts this little village, essentially, that you'd think is in the mid-1800s. But you come to find out, and this is a spoiler alert, that village is actually, it's set in current day time. But what's so resounding about it is it just shows that you only know what you know. If you were put like in this little piece of land and you were subject to only live in that land, that's all you would know.
Right.
And that's really what I feel like this whole flat earth thing is about. What I think the mud flood thing is about is like we're given a model. We take that model as gospel, and that model then ends up becoming the perimeter fence for our consciousness. And we actually believe that there's nothing beyond that perimeter fence. And then the people that give us the narrative tell us that what's on the other side of that perimeter fence is impossible. So we just stay within the perimeter. And that's the goal of the policymakers, is to keep us inside that circle. And, man, movies like The Village are incredible for showing that. But it's just so resounding. So one of the things that these mudflood people are bringing up, all this photographic evidence, is that they're able to show that even with these cities fully built, there's like nobody in them. Like, it's amazing, Mike. Have you seen these pictures of like San Francisco and London?
Yes. Yep.
In Philadelphia?
Yep.
Like they're saying in the 1800s, the best one's Sydney, Australia. They're saying that a bunch of convicts get shipped there. And within 11 years, they have a parliament building that we could not build today. So you're telling me you send the dregs of society halfway across the world, and they decide that they're going to mine and quarry all this limestone, and that they're going to build a parliament building that is essentially like 3 times the scale of what a regular human would build for themselves. Like, none of it, the narrative that we're fed is, I think it's a complete farce.
It is a farce. It's a lie of monstrous proportions, Christopher. That's why I many times just shake my head with regard to how deep all the lying and all of the deception goes. You know, when I watch some of those mud flood videos, and I'm talking about, there's a lot of channels out there that do some really fine work, and they're showing legitimate pictures of excavations where these structures, these buildings, they were buried. Why would you build windows underground or doorways underground? I mean, they're calling them basements, but why would a basement have a door that leads to the dirt or to the ground? I mean, why would you have windows where you couldn't look out of them?
So this is where my construction knowledge comes into play, right? So I can give the other side of that. So if you live in an area where there's frost, what occurs is you need a basement. You need to get below the frost line. And what that means is so the house doesn't heave. So in the winter, when the ground freezes, if you are not below the frost line, your structure will pop up.
Oh, okay.
So you dig down to get to where the ground is always, I forget what it is. It's like 58 degrees or 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's always about 6 feet down. So there is that, just so people know, like in current construction code, when I was in Michigan, you'd always dig down. You'd always have a basement that was about 10 feet below grade meaning ground level. And this is so your new house doesn't heave. But conversely, you would never, ever, ever put a window that would bisect grade relative to what's below you. So like when I was walking through Edinburgh, Scotland, and you see like half the windows are arched and they're underground, that makes no sense.
Right, that's right.
There was obviously something that flowed through those streets and backfilled things. And I got to stay, I had this favorite pub that I was drinking in Scotland. And I was talking to the bar owner about it because it was in his basement. And he said they had to dig the whole thing out. Like the rock walls were there, but they had to dig it out. So there was something in Scotland, at least in Edinburgh, and there's a massive volcano there that they built the castle on. But there's evidence everywhere, like the St. Petersburg Square stuff in Russia, the pictures that they're showing from Indonesia, and this is the thing, I was in Tamil Nadu, in the province of Tamil Nadu in India, and I went to this temple, and this is when I was really starting to get into astrology. And the astrological practice that they follow in that region of India is called Jyotish. And it's essentially real sky astrology. And so I went to this temple that was there, and they said that the temple was a few thousand years old. And it threw me for a loop because, one, when you're standing in the temple, they have all these different statuettes that will line up precisely with the different stars and constellations in the sky. And yet this thing was built thousands of years ago. So that, like, back then, this is like 2004 when I went to it, I was like, well, then parallax is impossible. The whole thing that NASA tells us about there's no parallax, because how could it be they could build something that was in alignment thousands of years ago and it's still in alignment? If we're hurtling through space and the globe model is correct, there would be no way any of that stuff would line up. But the secondary thing about that temple, and now in retrospect I could see it, was that there were catacombs under it. So I guarantee you when they built that actual temple, it was probably all above ground, and something happened there that buried everything.
Yeah, and whatever happened, Christopher, it was really of incredible proportions in order to dump 8 to 10 to 12 feet above what was originally there. It's amazing to me. I was watching one documentary on YouTube, and I think it was a Mark Knight video. It was very good. And Mark was showing these ancient structures buildings that they claim were built inside of mountains.
I've seen them. I went out to Arizona, in the early 90s, and we went out all throughout and looked. I forget the name of the Indians, the Anasazi, it might be. I forget. And I'm like, why do these things look like Greek temples?
Yeah.
The columns that are like, they say dug out. Like, once you start building, like once you actually get your hands on stuff and start to learn how difficult things are, like there's a reason why today the main building medium is still wood. It's because it's easy. You know how hard masonry is? Like when I was in Scotland too, I went to, I forget the name of the cathedral. It's like the Cathedral of the Rose. And I'm looking at the absolutely ornate carvings, quote unquote. I'm saying carvings that the Masons did there. Mike, there is no way that stuff was carved. There's not one mark of metal on any of it. It's all buffed to like a high polish. It looks like it's been sealed. And once you know, this is the key element, and this is where I think I can add to the discussion. Once you know that geopolymers, what Dr. Davidovich figured out, they cure, because it's an acidic curing condition, and the environment overall is acidic, it means it gets stronger over time, unlike an alkaline curing condition where things degrade over time. The technology of our forebears, they used geopolymers. So they would make a cast like you do today with people like, you hear the difference between cast rims for cars and forged rims. Well, the forged rims are much stronger, right? But anyway, you have like a negative space, you backfill it congeals, and then you have your form. All these like cupids and cherubim and angels and God and Jesus and all these like things that are carved out of stone where you'd have to be on a ladder. And how did they affix all this stuff? Like, there's something in construction called a cold joint. And that means like when something cures at a different rate of something else, they're very hard to fix together unless like you're bolting something straight through it. You go through 3 or 4 cathedrals and there's no cold joints. None. Zero. That's impossible. What they say it is and what it actually is not so. They were using geopolymers. They were casting these things. They probably have like a little factory. They would bring them to the site, and then they used their geopolymer adhesive and placed them exactly where they needed to be. I mean, in the geometries, Mike, there was this beautiful documentary that sort of proves all this, even though they were trying to prove it the other way, on National Geographic, where a bomb, I think this was in Italy, went through this cathedral atrium. This happened in like 1944 or something. To this day, with lasers, like laser beams and 3-dimensional modeling and all this stuff, they have not been able to fix the atrium. They have like an unlimited budget to go ahead and fix this atrium. You're talking 80 years after the fact, and they haven't been able to fix something with today's technology, and you're telling me today's technology is superior to what used to be? Come on.
This begs the question, Christopher, what is your theory, I should say, as to what could possibly have happened that buried so much of the world? Well, let me ask this question. Was it most of the world, or do you think it was just certain geographic areas of the world that were buried, and what happened?
I think it was mainly in the northern hemisphere plane. Like I don't prescribe to the globe model anymore. So like the interior circle.
Yep.
Of this plane of existence. I think that's where it was concentrated, and I think it had varying different degrees. But there's something like where I live right now is an area of Central America where we have lots of earthquakes, and so as a builder, I've had to educate myself on this thing called liquefaction. So what liquefaction is when the ground starts to shake, particles of high density will come to the top and particles of low density will go to the bottom. And so you build a building and it's very heavy and you think it's secure because it's on top of the ground and you've done everything that you can to make sure that you don't get water penetrating and all this type of thing, right? But it's heavy and it's dense, right?
Yep.
So the ground starts to shake and vibrate and it acts like this pebble that gets sucked down. And there's these great videos of the last big earthquake that hit Christchurch, New Zealand, of like people and cars like being halfly enveloped into the ground because the liquefaction was so quick and severe. And so there was some sort of event. It could have been like a massive earthquake that essentially, I think, created the Great Lakes, because when you look at very old maps of the United States, I shouldn't call it the United States, of North America at the time, there were no Great Lakes. And there's this massive fault line that runs right through the center of North America. And if you're to look at how the hemiplane model would work, or the flat Earth model would work, that same line would then go over and across through what we know of as Russia or Tartaria, or northern Russia, which was Tartaria then. I think there was just a massive earthquake event, and it created, massive plumes of smoke and carbon monoxide from from the volcanoes, and the liquefaction caused a lot of these beautiful structures to sink. And another cool thing to know is statistics. Like statistically, to kill a population, you only need to kill about 50% of it. Now, a lot of people don't know that. Like once you get below what's called replacement value of a population, the population will just go away. So this event didn't have to kill everyone. It just had to kill more than 49% of people, where then it was essentially like an incredible reboot. And that's my personal opinion. I think there was a catastrophe that essentially allowed the parasite class to go, we can now just make up our own story and tell everybody whatever we want.
Okay, so again, it's interesting because this defies a lot of premises and theories that are put forth by the truth community in general, where they would say, myself included, I guess, up until the point where I started to really look at this mud flood stuff, that, the parasite class, the controllers, have been doing what they've been doing for thousands of years. But the mud flood or whatever took place, let's just say 200 years ago, gave them the ability. Basically, they became opportunists and took advantage of an opportunity.
Precisely. That's what an invasive species does. So the way I look at it is like with where we started off. I think our origins are dignified. And when looking at what we used to be able to do relative to what we can do now, we were more advanced then. And there was a much higher consciousness. Like when they actually look at these structures, not only are they tuned inside harmonically, they're tuned outside to the outside environment also. That's something that's not even considered by most builders and architects today, right? So the consciousness was much higher. And so this brings me to a second part. I was an athlete for like a long part of my life. And most of how teams beat other teams is mental. It's mental. So you build a narrative. Like, I remember when I was in high school, our team wasn't all that good. And my coaches were smart enough where we would start rumors about guys that we had. Like we would actually lie and say, oh yeah, we have this guy that can do this and this guy that can do that. Because we knew through the grapevine, it would get to the other coaches. It would freak them out. And like a greater lesson with that is today, like the New England Patriots win every year and they're very well coached. But half of the reason why they win is because I heard the greatest analysis of it. Other coaches won't do what they're supposed to do because they already have it in their mind that Bill Belichick, the head coach for the Patriots, will stop them doing whatever they're going to do. So they go completely off what their bread and butter is. Like the opposing coach will not do what they're good at, thinking that the other coach will stop them. So I think the parasite class figured this out a long time ago. All you have to do, it's like the movie Invention of Lying. You just get people to believe, oh, we've been here forever. We've been dominating. We're so big, bad, and ooh. It's fucking bollocks, man. I don't buy it. They're an invasive species. They're a psychopath class. They saw their window of opportunity and they took it. And we're all living under the propaganda. Like you and I think the last podcast we did, I told you my rule. I'm like, if it's expensive to produce, I do not trust it, which essentially like eliminates Hollywood. Look at all the Hollywood narratives. Look at it all. Look at the news. All these things are so expensive to produce. And if you were to listen to that, you'd be so depressed because you would think, oh my God, not only are we stupid on a piece of dust, hurtling through other medium that wants to kill you, evil has been all pervasive forever. That's not the way it works, man. I don't buy it anymore. I have more faith. I have more like juice in me now than I ever have, just because I know in my bones we come from a dignified. I know we come from dignity.
So, Christopher, let me ask this question. The introduction of topics like flat Earth, mud flood, I'm of the school of thought that none of this stuff is organic. In other words, it's not somebody who sat there and said, aha. Now, that could happen, I guess. But when you take a look at how it exponentially grows, how it gets communicated out broadly in mass, it says to me that there is a much larger vehicle behind the introduction of these topics into the mass consciousness. So there was a decision made that said, look, we're going to put the flat earth narrative out there. It's going to go head to head with the whole heliocentric lie. And now, recently, I guess maybe about a year and a half, we've had the whole mud flood topic basically do the same thing. So I guess the question I'm asking you is, do you see this as organic, or do you see that there's some faction within the controllers that is intentionally introducing these narratives into the public domain so that people will wake up?
I don't think they introduce it for anybody to wake up. I think they introduce it as a way of seeing who's intelligent. I think there's a massive recruiting ploy that goes on. So it's like, if you can't beat them, join them thing. So what they'll do is and anybody that has ever done any type of experimenting, you have to have a control group. So you put out the mass propaganda, and just statistically the majority will follow that. Like, that's just what's so. And then you'll have a subset that will resist that, or people that actually trust their senses, or they came from a good family, or whatever it is, where they have enough, for whatever reason, they have enough cognitive ability to know what the narrative is relative to what is so isn't so. Well, there's a thing called controlled opposition. So I believe the policymakers really are awesome at knowing that there's going to be a certain percentage of people that don't buy the grand narrative. Let's control the opposition by introducing, half-truths or 80% truths, and then we can control that. We can spin that. We can funnel them in a certain direction, and we can create infighting, and we can do all these things on a very, very easy level. That's the only reason why I think this stuff comes out. And plus also, I think we come from logos. We actually come from truth. So the innate desire of beings that have their dignity is one to reconnect with that. And that's something that I don't think the parasite class can ever fully squelch out. I mean, they would if they could, but they can't. And in the way I'm thinking of things in this current timeline, they've only had the reins for about 150 years. Let's say at the most 200 years. We know for a fact in the early 1800s there was a mini ice age. What caused that mini ice age, we don't know. But like from 1811 to 1814, there was no food. So that would have killed off a lot of people. And I really think since then, like, the whole thing has been about controlling the narrative. Like, let's control the narrative. Let's control the narrative. I don't really think before that, given what we were talking about earlier, that they were under control. I think the consciousness of the planet was much higher.
So you believe a piece of this could be them separating the wheat from the chaff?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because, this is very well documented. Like, people that show extraordinary capacities get recruited. It's like anything else. You want the best players on your team. And they entice you with, all the worldly things, or fear. They'll use your fears against you.
What about the folks that are researching this information on YouTube? And I'm not going to name anybody because I have no idea whether these folks are bought and sold or they're actually doing genuine work. But what percentage of those that are doing this work, in other words, presenting mud flood, presenting flat earth and other topics like that, do you think are actually, how should I say this, sponsored by the controllers to continue to put that information out?
I think the mud flood stuff is still way too early. Like, back in the day when I used to listen to the Joe Rogan podcast, I really just listened to it to know what the controllers wanted young men to think,
Yeah.
Because he's pretty much a parrot for the establishment in that way, but specifically for young men. And then you and Sophia introduced the flat earth to me, I think in like 2015. And that like wrecked me because I was such a fanboy for space. But once I like got through the cognitive dissonance, I didn't see it actually enter his podcast till like late 2016. And it was very derogatory and derisive. And
you're talking about Rogan?
Yeah, like extremely. And he has this one guy on there that named Eddie Bravo that I really like listening to. And Eddie was always like, spitting like mad truth. Like he was so passionate about it. And I just watched the rhetoric that would go on and how they would spin and control the show. And then at that point, I just stopped listening because it was just so horrific. So I don't have a sample size of the mainstream media anymore, Mike, to really know if the grand narrative has started to push back against the mud flood stuff. Well, the mud flood stuff, to me personally, communicates like when anybody that studies like Victor Schauberger or John Worrell Keeley or Steinmetz or Tesla, you would know that like at the turn of the 20th century, the technology we had that was going to be introduced to the public was far exceeds what we have today. And it was much, much more beneficial to the environment than what we have today. And so what's happening to me now is like where my attention is going isn't so much on to compare the people that are feeding this information to me. I'm still like in the information gathering stage. If that makes any sense, because they're making links for me that like I've had these questions for at least 10, 12 years.
Yeah, my question before though was more geared toward, let's say, the YouTube community, right? So we have YouTube channels out there that are pushing certain alternative theories like flat earth, like mud flood. I was just asking you if you had any thoughts with regard to how many of those channels do you think are seeded by the controllers to put that out there. In other words, to make it the next big alternative research or truth or discussion point.
I don't think out of the ones, and this is like a recency bias thing, so I'll just put that caveat out there.
Yeah.
I've only been aware of it for a year, and there's only 5 different channels that I actually listen to about it. And the reason why I like those channels, one of them, I'm not going to say it is, I can't stand his accent. So I don't even listen to him. I just look at the pictures he presents. And the pictorial evidence to me is the most astounding thing. None of these sites, like when you look at how many subs they have, are big. Whether they were introduced by, the controlled opposition, let's say, I really don't know. I mean, I don't know. I never look at like trending statistics or any of that type of stuff. I think all of that's skewed anyway. But I really don't know, Mike. That's the quickest and shortest answer I have for you.
No, that's fine, Christopher. I was just asking because I wonder that myself. Because I've started with listening to certain channels, and then in the beginning it's making sense to me, and then I find over time that for some reason, and there's a multitude of reasons, I start to walk away from it, right? Because I start to maybe question certain things or whatever. So I was just curious to get your perspective on it, because it really is all over the place as far as how many YouTube channels are out there and really trying to get your head wrapped around who's genuine, who's not. How is this information getting introduced into the public, into the mass consciousness? Because I don't believe for one second that it's really organic. I mean, purely organic at the end of the day.
No, I'm totally with you on that. I also think they're working on the premise of supersaturation. So, whenever you have a solution, when you hit supersaturation, the solution cannot take any more. It can't take any more. And one of the blitzkriegs that they're doing to the human population is they're overstimulating them with information so that they've reached supersaturation and they really cannot take on anything new. And I really feel like at least that's where I'm at with almost all this stuff. Like I feel like I feel really good about my life and really good about what's in my like local sphere.
Yep.
And I'm only researching things not for the novelty principle. I'm only researching things to tie up loose ends. I'm not like researching things to like come up with like a completely like, new way of looking at things. Like, and the more adults that I talk to, and I use that word adult specifically, and it's not age related, the more adults that I speak to, almost all of them have hit super saturation. Like almost all of them are just like, okay, I'm good. I've hit my limit. And now it's all about solution orientation. It's all about, okay, what can we do in our local area to make things better?
Well, that's exactly where I'm at. We had a little discussion before the show started, and I've reached that saturation point too. And it gets to a point where you know what you know. I don't have to be convinced anymore about certain things because I just know, okay, I know that that's the way it is.
Right.
Right. So you're looking to move to the next higher level, not to stay at the same level and just keep running laterally. You want to go up and beyond.
Right.
You want to transcend this stuff, and you want to be able to do more work in getting you to understand from an inner perspective on what you need to do to put yourself on a better path. For me, that means that I can't incessantly just listen to the same old stuff over and over and over again. I've got to keep moving, taking the next step up on the ladder, Christopher. And I think that's exactly where you're at. What's the next step? And then the next step and the next step, and keep moving. Don't stay static, because if you do, like you said, you're going to get oversaturated, and it all becomes a big blur at that point. And many people, if they stay there, will just throw their hands up, and that'll be that.
Yeah, that's the thing is, like, I'm naturally a builder, an experimenter, an inventor. So at some point you learn information and then you have to apply it.
Right.
And so you're moving from first, second to third chakra, the fourth chakra, like it's through application, you gain gratitude, yada, 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 the way the spiral works. So I just tell people, like, be honest in the way you peruse information. Have truth, have logos be like your number one priority. And once you learn something that's significant that can make life better, apply it. Like, actually apply it. Like, don't get stuck in the information gathering phase. It's like guys who watch pornography. Like, after a certain time, like, just nothing will stimulate you. It's like the same thing with information. Like, after like, how many fucking hours of TV can you watch? Like, get off your ass and actually start, building. Do something with the information. And that's why the mudflood stuff points to such a beautiful origin story. Look at the difference of the origin story. Because origin is ancestry, right? So the origin story we were fed was that we're hurtling through space after some cosmic Big Bang. And there was some primordial ooze that after billions of years formed itself into primates. And these primates somehow, some way evolved into tool making. And then here we are. That's the origin story of scientism. Now look at this other origin story. We started off perfect. And we're on a plane of existence that was divinely created. And in this origin story, we were perfectly and harmoniously in balance with our environment. And then somewhere, somehow, a lie entered. And that lie evolved into deceit, and it ended up destroying the system, or is about to destroy the system. Which origin story do you prefer? And so for me, the origin story I'm choosing to give my attention to is that we come from dignity. And so my entire life is about reclaiming dignity. And in everything that I do, I try and be as dignified as possible.
I agree 100%. We have to come from that perspective, Christopher, because if you don't come from a perspective of dignity, then you have no self-esteem, implied self-esteem.
Right.
Right?
Absolutely.
And you're always going to look at yourself in a way that well, it's not going to be positive. You're not going to walk around with a lot of confidence. You're not going to think in terms of being successful. That's why, like you said, they want to take you back. You evolved from monkeys, you know?
And it's total BS, Mike. And just so if people haven't heard that, listen to this, that haven't heard our previous podcast, I want everybody to know that I was a soy boy evolutionist. I completely and utterly bought the grand narrative that is out there right now, hook, line, and sinker from age 13 to age 38. I was a completely engineered, inauthentic being. I had glimpses of authenticity and dignity, but the narrative itself made me nihilistic. It created a lower energy state within me. So even though I did neat stuff here and there, my actual point of focus was undignified.
Yeah.
Over the last 5 years, it's been a complete reversal of that. And it's because the grand narrative is a lie. And, I get a lot of people that ask, well, why would they lie? Why would they lie? There's a spiritual principle that if you are naive and you believe lies, the person that lies to you takes your power. And they're parasites. They need power because they don't generate anything themselves. So they have to lie and lie and lie and lie and lie and engineer people to be more and more and more naive so they can actually take our power away from us. So I just break it down to, is it empowering or is it disempowering? And everything that's expensive from a media perspective that's produced is disempowering. So I'm going the other way. I don't pay any attention to expensive media, and I just choose to give my attention to that which is empowering. And my life is all the better for it.
Well, that's exactly what I've done too. I've just disconnected from so much of this stuff, Christopher, because you are giving them power when you focus on their narratives and you focus on their antics. That's what they're doing. They're stealing your energy. They're stealing your power. They're stealing your consciousness and your mind. And I refuse to do it. What I have found is my transformation over time, because I started the same way you did. I mean, I believed everything that, I was taught in school and about everything. And I ran with it. I didn't question it. But once I started questioning it and I started to realize that I could manifest my own reality, that I could actually improve my life by investing in myself, doing my work, my inner work, my life got exponentially better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this will, for people that are believing the current narrative, especially as men, it's very important that we're working, we're providing. That is a very, testosterone building, life affirming thing for men. And when I was a nihilist due to the popular conditioning, I didn't have any oomph or gusto to get anything done. Because in my mind, it was what's the point? It literally would be what's the point? It was this apathy, and it was a low grade apathy. But I meet tons of people that are afflicted with apathy. And when I start to dive into their belief patterns, it's because they're in cognitive dissonance. They don't actually trust their senses. And they're believing ideas that are energy. It's just that simple. But the nihilistic way of looking at things, I really don't think is a natural thing. I think it's just a product of believing lies.
There was a quote that was given to me. Some of the other work that I'm doing, specifically on the McCartney conspiracy, there was a source that came to me and he wrote me and he gave me this line or this sentence or two that has to do with how the Masons view the people. And he says there are two classes of people, one class who have the key of knowledge needed to understand, and the other class of people who do not possess that key. Now, I know that seems overly binary to a lot of people. It was very interesting to me to get a view into how they view the masses. Either you possess the key needed to understand or you do not.
I would agree. I would agree, but I also lean in the direction of John Taylor Gatto. He wrote a series of books like Weapons of Mass Education.
Yeah, yeah.
And he was such a great revisionist historian, because when he would look at the writings of a lot of these foundations and these educational platforms, he had the best quotes ever. And one of them was like, "You're going to condemn the people for something or for a way of being in which you taught them to be that way."
Right.
And this is like the whole duper's delight. So a lot of Masonry, like I don't know enough about the whole Masonic thing to really know their true intentions. But I know good people don't use deceit to get what it is that they want. Like, nobody needs to, I don't need anybody else to explain that to me. And a lot of what the Masons do is it's very deceitful. It's a lot of lies by omission type thing.
Well, therein lies the problem, and I'm with you on that. I've had Freemasons contact me and try to convince me, that this is all for the good. There's a master plan in place and all this stuff. But I think of myself as a person that is awake, and why do you need to rely on deception?
Yeah, I mean, they'll use the excuse of, well, people aren't ready yet. Well, they're not ready yet because you chop their legs out from them from the get-go.
Right. That's right. That's right. And it's a very good quote that you gave before. I mean, we have what we have today because they put it there.
Right.
They dumbed down the education. They dumbed down the academia. They just filled people's heads. They contaminated their minds with nonsense and lies. And then they want to turn around and say, well, we've got to take you by the hand and walk you down the path of light. Well, who put us in the dark? So.
So this is where I'm excited. This is where the super saturation is going to fall in on them. Maybe it's timed this way. I don't know. But
yeah,
it's coming out right now. Like almost all professional sports is rigged. And the main way the way things are rigged isn't from overt things. It's from covert things. So I can explain. In all games rely on momentum, right? So players, when they start doing good, they start feeling good about themselves and they start playing better. So if you're able to time a penalty at just the right time, it destroys the momentum, right? So, but also conversely, let's say you let the other team cheat, right? So say in football, say you let the other team, your opposing opponent, cheat. That's also demoralizing. And what that does to you when you're a player on the field, and I can speak firsthand about it, is you actually lose momentum because of the no calls. They're called no calls. So what's really neat is a bunch of statisticians are now starting to chart no calls in sports. And this is where it's all going to get flipped on its head. It's all going to get flipped on its head because they're statistically irrelevant. And you've never heard this before. People don't talk about this. You always hear about the penalty that was called. But now, this year, they had a massive, massive mess up in the NFC Championship game where there was a blatant, absolutely blatant penalty that wasn't called. And it was a no call. But it was a no call that was obvious. And now, people are livid. There's, lawsuits. And you've got all these statisticians now looking at, how many times in a game does the no call actually affect the outcome of the game? And I think what this is going to do, and this is where the whole bread and circus thing starts to go away. I mean, the bread thing has been known for a while with all the chemicals and shit like that. They've been poisoning that for a long time. But now the circus thing is going to start to go away. And you're going to get a lot of disenfranchised men because the way they've been able to curtail men is, through a bunch of propaganda, but also get them into sports, get their focus completely invested into sports all the time. Well, once their sacred cow of the NFL and the NHL and the NBA goes away, and they know it's just essentially WWE wrestling. And by the way, when I say this, I'm saying this from from a player's perspective. I think the players play their asses off. But the no calls, the referee class, which is a great analogy to the minion class of the policymakers, I think this whole thing is just it's gonna blow up, and we don't have more than 5 years.
This is interesting, Christopher, because what you're saying for me makes a lot of sense, and it's very important because some people will say that professional sports is rigged, and they'll point to the players and all of this, and which makes it a little more difficult to get your head wrapped around because you have to think to yourself, all right, so the more people you have conspiring, the more difficult it is to manage, right? So I think what I hear you saying is these penalties when they're called, I mean, all it really takes is the referees or the umpires in the game, in the case of baseball, to make a certain call or not make a certain call at a certain point in order to change the momentum and then thus change the likely outcome of the game. So you just need a couple of people, a few people to be participating in this in order to steer the game. Am I hearing that right?
Absolutely. It's just like you don't need to control the voting populace. You just need to control the people who count the votes.
Yeah, right.
It's the same thing with referees. Like the referee class is all you have to have in your pocket. And you don't even need to have them all in your pocket.
Right.
It's that simple. And the no calls, it's statistically impossible. This is something that needs to be known. It's statistically impossible for no calls not to have an outcome on the game, if not the outcome on the game. So the first time I noticed this was in 2004. I think it was 04-05 Super Bowl. The Steelers were playing Seattle. And you could tell the NFL had a vested interest in the Pittsburgh Steelers winning because they kept promoting it. Certain players were returning to their hometown, yada, yada, yada. It was kind of annoying. But Seattle was like demolishing them. It was awesome. But then you start to see the Steelers players cheating. And then on the other side, they were calling Seattle's best player, Walter Jones, for all these phantom holding calls. And they would show on the replay, there was no player near him. And it broke my heart because I was like, at that point, the NFL was a sacred cow to me. And I was sitting next to a much older, much more skeptical person. And they're like, no, there's no billion-dollar industries that aren't rigged. And I was like, it was so like deflating. I was like, oh, because that just ran true. Like, yeah, what billion-dollar industry isn't rigged? And so it's the same way you could take this analogy through the legal system, right? Like you have people that get no calls. Like you get the minion class of people that they'll do something illegal, but there's a no call. The refs don't call them on it. But then you have the peasant class. They do something, minor or insignificant or whatever, and then they get the penalty. It's like this analogy goes through and through, man. It's like it's insane. And so I think this is really going to come to the forefront of people's consciousness. I think people are really going to start to wake up to the no calls. And then once you let go of your sacred cows and okay, this is on me to be dignified. This is on me to make this happen. Then that wave of empowerment actually changes things.
The person that told you that these $1 million or $1 billion entities, they have to be controlled. They have to be. They're not going to leave very much, if anything, to chance.
No, nothing. And I'm just like I was a huge space fan, and that was a sacred cow I had to let go. I had to let go of professional sports too. Like that was something, you grow up as a young man in the United States, and that's that's revered more than anything. And, had to let that go too.
Yeah, I had to let it go as well. I mean, I was a huge baseball fan. I used to, I loved the New York Mets, and I was a big Giants fan, the NFL Giants, not the San Francisco Giants. And I just walked away from it, Christopher, many, many years ago. I just got very tired of, I don't know, it just seemed like a waste of my time. That's what happened. It just became very obvious to me that I had better ways to spend my time than to sit there and watch sports I don't mind watching it. I was a very good athlete too growing up when I was back in high school and into my college years and stuff like that. But and I can enjoy a good game. I like watching a good amateur game, to be honest with you. The professional level, I don't know. It's a big turnoff to me.
I love the precision of the athletes, and I love that aspect of it. But I'm under no illusions of outcomes. I've known professional soccer players in Europe that would tell me, like before the game, somebody walks in and writes the score on a chalkboard and then immediately, erases it. Or on like a dry erase board, they'll write the score and then they'll erase it. And that's always what the score ends up being. It's just, it's, they see it in the Tour de France and professional soccer and basket. Like, come on, like Vegas didn't get built by luck. Like give me a break. So it's all these ways of keeping people occupied. You disempower them by converting their work into your profit, not their profit, right? You disempower them with belief systems that have them believe that they come from nothing and return nothing. You disempower them in every single way possible. And this onslaught is because this parasite class is doing whatever they can to hold on. Like they really don't have much power. They have influence, but they don't have power. And that's something I always try and make the delineation for people. It's like power is power. Like power has the capacity to convert and move things in a magnificent way, and it does it by its own internal authenticity. Influence can happen through deceit. So I'm really of the opinion that the parasite class is extremely influential but has no power.
Well, I would agree, because otherwise they wouldn't have to manipulate us, right? They can go about doing what they want to do without having to manipulate our minds, our consciousness, and so on. There's a reason why they have to do that. There's a reason why they have to lie and deceive all the time. So that would lend credence to your argument, Christopher, that they really don't have power.
No.
They have influence. Yeah. So anyway, is there anything else you wanted to cover? This has been a fantastic discussion. It's very, very thought-provoking.
Oh, wonderful. That makes me really happy. No, just like I'm going to continue to look at this architectural evidence. I'm personally going to continue to build domes and structures that incorporate the architectural process of biomimicry. Because the biomimicry essentially means like nature knows better than we do to make things that last. and also make things really beautiful. So this is part of my fascination with ancient buildings, is they always have like round elements in them, like, things that have curves, because curves are inherently strong. So I'm just in the application phase. I've been in the absorption, learning, and discarding phase for a long time, and now I'm just applying what I've learned.
Well, what you should do is send me pictures of your domes that you're building. Folks, Christopher's doing amazing work down in Costa Rica, and I took a look at the pictures you sent me, Christopher, on Facebook, and really amazing stuff. So if you send me those pictures, what I'll do is I'll put them into the slideshow for this video.
Oh, great. Yeah, I'll do that.
Well, Christopher, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I promise we'll catch up again. It won't take as long as it did this time.
No problem. No problem.
All right. And we'll just catch up and chat, because those are the best types of discussions, when we just have a frank discussion.
I think so too, Mike. It's great to hear from you, and I'm glad everything's going so well in your life.
You too. And I know you got married recently, and congratulations.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, my friend.
All right, Mike. Have a great day.
You too, Christopher. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
And that concludes another Sage or Quay interview, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. Links to my guests' websites and social media are listed in the description box below. And as always, I would like to thank everyone for listening and visiting the blog. You can find all my social media and web links by visiting my hub website at sageofquay.com. Also, if you get a moment, please visit laboroflovemusic.com to check out my music and album releases. And remember, live in truth and always serve creation. It's really that simple. See everyone with the next show. Be safe, enjoy, and God bless.
change the world. Yeah, make it real. Gotta change the world. We're gonna